Hello, I'm doing a book review, and the book I want to review is The Death of Superman. Now, The Death of Superman is a comic book story arc written by several different writers, and this story arc spans over a couple of issues of Superman, as well as a couple of issues of Justice League. Now, The Death of Superman is actually only volume 1 of a much longer story arc, but so far this is the only volume I've read in this series. Now, The Death of Superman is one of the most famous Superman stories ever written, and when this came out back in 1993, this was a pretty big deal because, in case you couldn't tell from the title, they actually kill off Superman, or at least it appears they do. I'm actually not sure how they bring him back later on. I mean, I understand there are different Superman continuities, but this does appear to be set in the mainstream DC continuity, so I'm assuming they do bring him back later on in this story arc, but I'm not really sure how they did that, though. I might end up just looking that up. But this comic, as I said, was a pretty big deal back in the early 90s, because I think a lot of people at the time thought that they were going to permanently kill the character of Superman off. Now, this comic was born out of what I believe is known as the comic book speculator boom. Basically, in like the early 90s, comic books were doing like crazy things with their characters, like trying to take more risks and do things that they never normally did with these characters. So, like you had the Batman story arc Nightfall, where Bane breaks Batman's back, and then Batman, for a couple of issues of Batman, is replaced with Azrael, and this story arc was kind of born out of that whole speculator boom. Now, the basic plotline of The Death of Superman is this being who later on in the story gets dubbed Doomsday is tearing its way through America, and this being appears to be just as powerful, if not more powerful, than Superman himself. And in the story, the Justice League tries to take this being out, but they fail miserably, and Superman tries to stop this being because it gets to a point where this being is heading straight for Metropolis, and he realizes that this being is pretty much unstoppable and probably could kill everybody on the planet if it wanted to, so now Superman must stop at nothing to defeat this being. Now, I definitely thought The Death of Superman was a pretty good story arc. Now, I'll admit, I'm not as much of a follower of Superman as I am of Batman, and there were a lot of references in this book to things that I would probably understand better if I've read other Superman story arcs or other Superman graphic novels that are set in this same continuity, because there's a lot of references in this book to other things that are going on in the DC universe that I probably would understand better if I actually read the comic books that they're referring to in this book. Like, I would say for the most part, this can be read as a standalone story, but at the same time, they do make a lot of other references to things that are going on in this universe, in the DC universe. Now, one thing I do want to point out is this book, in a lot of ways, is almost just this big-ass action sequence, because once Superman starts fighting Doomsday, he really doesn't stop, and it just continues on, and it spans across all these different issues of Superman and all these different issues of Justice League, and the whole book is basically just this giant-ass action sequence where Superman is battling Doomsday, and as the title suggests, it literally is a battle to the death. Now, one thing that was kind of cool about this is there are certain points where you really get the point of view of people, of ordinary people living in this world, and you see how they view Superman and the other superheroes, and they view him positively, but you see some people who are almost just kind of jaded by the world that they live in. For example, in this story, there's a certain point before Superman starts fighting Doomsday where Superman Superman agrees to do a television interview, and there's a certain point in the story where this, like, snot-nosed kid comes home, and this kid really doesn't respect his mother very much, and basically his mother's like, "Oh dear, did you hear that Superman was on the TV today?" And the kid's like, "Superman, big deal." And I'm reading this like, "Kid, Superman is basically the equivalent of a god, and you're saying big deal?" But then again, given the DC universe, like, this is a world inhabited by other beings who are almost just as powerful as Superman, and in this universe, you have aliens, and you even have magic, and it almost makes sense that there would be people who would be so jaded by the world that they live in that they're not even impressed by a man who can fly. And you can even draw some Christ-like analogies from the ending of this book, where Superman dies defeating Doomsday, and Superman realizes that Doomsday has the power to kill the entire human race, and he dies protecting the human race, and you can definitely make some analogies with Jesus Christ dying for our sins. Now, this story arc was adapted and reinterpreted several times in other media that's based on the Superman character. For example, there was an episode of the animated Justice League series that took a lot of inspiration from this story arc, and Doomsday even showed up in Justice League Unlimited. In 2007, there was a direct-to-DVD animated film called Superman Doomsday, which was a direct adaptation of this story arc. And Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice also took a lot of inspiration from this story as well. But yeah, that was my review on The Death of Superman, and bye.